You have held something long enough to love it, a mug, a bowl, a cup that belonged to someone who is no longer here. And then one morning, it slips. It hits the floor. It breaks into pieces that scatter further than you expected. And your first instinct, the one nobody taught you but everyone shares, is to throw it away. Because broken means finished. Broken means less than it was. In Japan, that instinct is met with a different question. Not how do we hide this, but how do we honor it? For 500 years, Japanese craftsmen have been repairing broken pottery with gold, not to disguise the damage, to make it the most beautiful part of the object. The practice is called Kintsugi, and what it teaches about pain, healing, and what we are worth after we have broken will change the way you see every scar you have ever tried to hide. To understand Kintsugi, you have to go back, not to a museum, not to a philosophy text, to a single afternoon in 15th century Japan, when a man opened a box and felt his heart sink. His name was Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He was the 8th shogun of Japan, one of the most powerful men in the country, a military leader, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. But what he wanted most was not power. It was a tea bowl, a rare celadon piece from China, pale green, delicate. The kind of object that makes a room feel quieter just by being in it. He treasured it the way some people treasure a letter they never threw away. One day it broke. He had the fragments carefully collected, wrapped, sent back to China with instructions to repair it. He waited months. When the box finally returned, he opened it with the certainty of a man who expects good news. What he found horrified him. The Chinese craftsmen had used the standard repair method of the time, heavy metal staples, crude brackets of iron driven through the porcelain to hold the pieces together. The bowl held water. It was technically functional, but it looked like something that had been hurt and was not allowed to forget it. The shogun rejected it immediately. And then he did something that changed the history of craft. He turned to his own Japanese artisans and issued a challenge. Fix this, but make it beautiful. Make it something worth looking at again. The craftsmen experimented. They needed something that would bind the ceramic without betraying it. They chose urushi, the sap of the lacquer tree, one of the most durable natural adhesives on Earth. Once cured, it resists heat, acid, and water in ways that modern synthetic glues still struggle to match. But urushi is not simple. The lacquer tree is related to poison ivy. In its liquid form, it is highly toxic. Direct contact causes severe rashes that can last for weeks. The craftsmen who worked with it risked their own skin to heal the pottery. That detail matters, because it means the repair cost something. To the urushi they added powdered gold, applied to every crack, every fracture line, every place where the bowl had given way. When the shogun saw the result, he did not speak immediately. The bowl was no longer just restored. The veins of gold running through it had created something that had never existed before, more complex than the original, more layered, more alive. It was more beautiful than the day it was made, because now it had a history, and the history was visible, and the visibility was the point. Most people hear about Kintsugi and think about the gold, the visual, the beauty of the finished object catching light across its repaired lines. But the gold is the last step. And what happens before it tells a different story entirely. The primary material in traditional Kintsugi is urushi lacquer. It does not behave like ordinary glue. It does not dry. It cures. And the difference between those two things is not technical, it is philosophical. Ordinary glue dries through evaporation. You apply it. The moisture leaves. It hardens. The process moves away from its environment to complete itself. Urushi does the opposite. It absorbs moisture from the surrounding air to solidify. It pulls from what is around it. It requires humidity, warmth, specific conditions. A repaired piece is placed inside a wooden cabinet called a muro, a small enclosed space where temperature and moisture are carefully maintained. And there it sits, for days, sometimes weeks, before the next layer can be applied. The process has no shortcut that preserves the integrity of the repair. Apply the base layer, wait, sand it down by hand, apply the middle layer, wait again, polish, apply the red lacquer, wait. Only when every previous layer has fully cured, only when the surface is completely ready. Does the craftsman apply the gold? A single repair can take 3 months to complete. In a world where we expect to order something and receive it the next morning, where we measure recovery in days and expect to feel better on a schedule, 3 months for one broken bowl is almost incomprehensible. But that incomprehension is exactly the point Kintsugi is making. The craft is not asking you to be patient as a virtue. It is showing you that some things cannot be rushed without being ruined, that healing has its own timeline, that the conditions have to be right, that each layer has to be complete before the next one begins. And the cost is not only time. The Urushi craftsman risks their own skin at every stage. Prolonged exposure causes reactions that can take weeks to resolve. The hands that heal the pottery are themselves marked by the work. Something is given in the process of repair, not just effort, something more personal than that. The gold arrives last, not as decoration, as evidence. Evidence that every slow, careful step was completed, that nothing was skipped, that the repair was done with full attention and full patience. What the craft teaches is this: the beauty is not despite the waiting, it is because of it. The finished bowl is not beautiful in spite of how long it took. It is beautiful because of exactly that. There is something most of us were taught so early and so consistently that it stopped feeling like a lesson and started feeling like a fact. Hide the damage, fix the surface. Present a version of yourself that shows no evidence of having struggled, and we became very good at it. We learned which stories to leave out of the conversation, which parts of our history to smooth over before anyone could ask questions, which cracks to cover quickly before someone noticed and drew the conclusion we feared most, that we were less than we appeared, that the damage was the truth and the surface was the lie. But there is a cost to that kind of maintenance, and research has begun to name it clearly. Studies on perfectionism conducted across multiple universities, including research published in the journal Psychological Bulletin, analyzing data from over 40,000 participants, found that perfectionism has risen significantly across generations, and that it correlates strongly with anxiety, depression, and a persistent sense of inadequacy. Not because people are failing more, because the standard of concealment has become higher. The effort required to appear undamaged is itself damaging. The exhaustion is not from the flaw, it is from the hiding. Wabi-sabi, the Japanese philosophy that underlies Kintsugi, offers a completely different premise. A moss-covered stone is not a stone that failed to stay clean. It is a stone that has been somewhere long enough to grow something. A faded wooden wall is not a maintenance problem. It is a record of seasons. The worn path through a garden is not a sign of neglect. It is evidence of everyone who has walked there and found it worth returning to. In this view, the absence of wear is not beauty. It is the absence of history. What Kintsugi adds to this is something more specific. When you hide the crack, you also hide the repair. You erase the evidence of your own resilience, the effort it took to hold together, the time it required, the care that went into continuing. All of it disappears beneath a surface that pretends nothing happened. The gold does not pretend. That is its entire meaning. It says something happened here. The object broke. Someone chose not to throw it away. Someone spent months returning it to wholeness. And that choice, that patience, that refusal to discard what was damaged is now the most visible thing about it. Hiding the crack protects a version of yourself that no longer exists, the version that had not yet been through what you have been through. The gold honors the one that does, the one that knows what it cost, and remained anyway. The cracks in pottery are visible. You can trace them with your finger. You know exactly where the break was and how far it traveled. The cracks in people are almost never visible, and that invisibility makes them heavier, because you carry them without anyone being able to see what you are carrying. Grief that arrives without warning in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The failure that rewrote the story you had told yourself about who you were. The illness that changed what your body was capable of. The betrayal that made you careful in ways you were not careful before. These are the breaks that do not show on the surface. The ones people spend years trying to move past rather than move through. But something is documented in the research that most people are never told. The phenomenon is called post-traumatic growth. It is distinct from resilience. Resilience is the ability to return to who you were before difficulty. Post-traumatic growth is something different. It is the finding, documented across decades of psychological research by scientists including Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina, that a significant number of people who survive serious difficulty do not simply recover. They report greater empathy than they had before, deeper and more honest relationships, a clearer sense of what actually matters to them, a stronger and more specific sense of purpose. The break changes the material. What comes after is not the same as what existed before. It is more layered, more considered, more precise. The Japanese have a related concept, mono, no aware, a phrase that translates roughly as the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the recognition that things pass, that nothing stays, and that the feeling this produces is not only sadness, it is also a form of depth. To feel loss deeply is to have loved deeply. The scar is proportional to the meaning. You do not grieve what did not matter. The Urushi craftsman understands this without naming it. The process of healing costs something. Your hands are marked by the work. The repair is not free. But what is produced is more complex, more durable, and more specific than what existed before the break. Your scar is not proof that something went wrong. Every life of sufficient length and sufficient love will break in some way. That is not a design flaw. That is the design. Your scar is proof that something happened, something real enough to leave a mark, and that you remained, that you continued, that you are here now, carrying the weight of it, which means you were strong enough to carry it. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. There is a version of self-acceptance that gets misunderstood almost every time it is described. People hear it and think it means lowering the standard, deciding that growth no longer matters, settling for less than you are capable of. That is not what it means. And the confusion between those two things keeps a great many people stuck. Self-acceptance is not the decision to stop becoming. It is the decision to stop spending the energy required for becoming on concealment instead. There is a writer who spent years feeling unworthy of claiming her Japanese heritage. She was mixed. She did not look the way she thought she was supposed to look. She did not speak the language fluently enough. She did not fit the image she had been given of what belonging to that culture required, so she hid that part of herself, kept it at a distance, treated it as something she had not yet earned the right to call her own. And the hiding cost her, not dramatically, quietly, the way a slow leak costs you, until one day there is not much left. When she stopped hiding it, when she turned toward the fracture instead of away from it, she built an entire body of work from that exact place. The crack became the content. The thing she had spent years concealing became the thing the world most needed from her. Research on self-compassion conducted by psychologist Kristen Neff at the University of Texas at Austin found something that runs counter to what most of us were taught. Self-criticism does not improve performance. It does not sharpen the standard. It is associated with higher anxiety, lower motivation, and significantly reduced ability to recover from failure. Self-acceptance, by contrast, the honest and non-judgmental acknowledgement of where you are, is associated with greater resilience, higher motivation, and a stronger capacity to keep going after difficulty. The golden Kintsugi is not arrogance. It is not the claim that the break never hurt. It is the quiet and deliberate decision to make your history visible instead of shameful. To stop pretending the surface is the whole story, to let the repair be seen. And what changes when you do that is not only internal, the people around you change too. Because when you stop performing wholeness, you give others permission to stop performing it as well. The crack you show becomes the crack that makes someone else feel less alone in theirs. Kintsugi is not a single dramatic decision. It is a small, repeated choice. To acknowledge what broke, to apply something careful and patient to the damage, to wait, and to continue. That is all it has ever asked of anyone. Nobody sits down one morning and decides to turn their pain into something meaningful. It does not happen that way. It happens slowly, sideways, in the middle of doing something else entirely, and usually only becomes visible in retrospect. There is an artist who spent 15 years building a career in a direction that felt correct, because everyone around her confirmed it was correct. Then the work stopped. The commissions dried up. The version of herself she had constructed with such careful effort collapsed in a way she did not see coming. She described the period that followed as the most disorienting of her life. Not painful in a clean way. Painful in the way of not knowing who you are when the thing you used to be is gone. What she made in that period was different from anything she had produced before. Quieter. More specific. Less concerned with what it was supposed to look like. The collapse had removed something she had not known was in the way. The work that came from that clearing was the work that lasted. There is a woman who received a diagnosis that rewrote her understanding of time, not immediately fatal, but permanent. The kind of news that makes ordinary Tuesday afternoons feel suddenly precious and slightly unreal. She did not recover in the way the word recovery usually implies. She did not return to who she was before. Instead, she built something from the changed version of herself. A community of people facing the same diagnosis. A place where the crack was the entry point. Where you were not required to pretend you were further along than you were. The break became a door, and she held it open for everyone who came after. There is a grandfather who fled war as a young man, who had gone to the city to study art, to become something, to make the kind of work that lasts. And then the bombs came, and he fled back to the countryside to teach children and survive. The ambition he had carried to the city did not survive the journey back, but the painting did, decade after decade, quietly. Without an audience large enough to matter by any external measure, he painted anyway. And the work he left behind told the story of a man who had lost what he wanted and found something more durable in its place. Something that outlasted the war, the loss, the distance from the life he had imagined. None of them used the word Kintsugi. None of them described themselves as practicing anything. They were simply living through what broke them, and finding eventually that the repair had become their most important work. You do not need a broken bowl to practice this. You do not need a workshop, or a philosophy degree, or a trip to Japan. You do not need to have survived something extraordinary. You need only to look honestly at what is already broken in your life, and make a different decision about what it means. The first shift is the simplest and the hardest. Name what broke, not to revisit it endlessly. Not to build a permanent residence in the pain of it, but because the lacquer cannot bind what you refuse to look at. The repair begins with acknowledgement, with the quiet and honest act of saying this happened. This changed me. This left a mark, not as confession, not as performance, simply as truth. The craftsman does not begin with gold. The craftsman begins by examining every fracture line with full attention. That examination is not weakness. It is the necessary first step of everything that follows. The second shift is about time. Give the repair the time it actually requires. Not the time you wish it required. Not the timeline that would be convenient. Not the schedule that would allow you to reassure the people around you that you are fine now. The actual time. Urushi cannot be rushed without cracking. Healing cannot be forced without leaving something incomplete beneath the surface. The layers have to cure in order, each one fully before the next begins. Grief has its own humidity. Recovery has its own muro. The only way to get to the gold is through every step that comes before it. There is no version of this that skips the waiting. The third shift is perhaps the most unfamiliar. Let the gold show. This does not mean broadcasting your pain to anyone who will listen. It does not mean making your damage the first thing you offer in every room you enter. It means simply this. Stop hiding it from the people who deserve to see it. Stop editing your history for the comfort of an audience that is not as fragile as you assume. Your story, told honestly, is not a burden. It is the thing that makes you recognizable to someone who needed to know they were not alone. Kintsugi does not promise that pain disappears. It does not offer the comfort of erasure. What it offers is something more honest and more durable than that. It says that pain, held carefully, worked with patiently, and allowed to be visible when the time is right, can become something worth keeping, not in spite of what it cost you, because of exactly that. Think about that broken object again. The one on the floor. The pieces that scattered further than you expected. You see it differently now. Somewhere in Japan, a bowl sits on a shelf. It broke 500 years ago. Someone chose not to throw it away. Someone spent months returning it to wholeness with patient hands and powdered gold. Today, the veins of gold running through it are the first thing anyone notices. Not the crack, the repair, not the damage, the decision to stay with it. You are not less than you were before you broke. You are more layered, more specific, more yours. The most beautiful things in the world have all been broken. So have you. That is not a flaw. That is the whole point. If this felt like something you needed to hear, subscribe. Every week we explore the ideas that help us live with more depth, more patience, and more grace.